Picture this. Your compliance program just helped you close an acquisition, earn approval on the first pass, and scale with confidence. Sound too good to be true? Today's guest knows firsthand just what that looks like. Dr. Mitesh Amin, CEO of AlignedCardio, brings a truly unique perspective to healthcare leadership spanning tech, consulting, and clinical practice. In this conversation, Ross and Dr. Amin explore what it really looks like to go from handling compliance on your own to building a structured program that becomes part of how you grow, acquire, and operate. Dr. Amin shares why he once thought a compliance program would be a heavy lift full of people telling him what he couldn't do, and how the reality turned out to be the opposite. He also talks about building a culture where compliance is part of the conversation from the start, not something brought in after the fact. This episode is a real look at what it takes to go from "I'll do it later" to making compliance a true strategic partner in your growth.
Welcome to the Compliance Advantage podcast. This is where healthcare executives transform compliance from a burden into a strategic asset that drives both growth and peace of mind. I'm your host, Ross Ronan, founder of Ronan Healthcare Compliance and a healthcare compliance strategist with nearly 30 years of industry experience. I'll help you stay ahead of evolving regulations while building the sustainable, compliant organization that lets you focus on high-level strategy and exceptional patient outcomes. Remember, compliance pays dividends. Invest today. Welcome to the Compliance Advantage podcast. And today we have a very special guest, Dr. Mitesh Amin from AlignedCardio. He is the CEO and formerly the CEO and the head of James River Cardiology. Dr. Amin, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks, Russ. Looking forward to the conversation.
We've been acquainted, I think, for a number of years now when we started working together, when you started creating this MSO for AlignedCardio. And we were fortunate enough to work with you on your compliance needs. And so we really appreciate the partnership that we've had over the last few years. And I've really enjoyed getting to know you.
Yeah, likewise. I think we've learned a lot over the last 3.5 years, and I feel like the learning that never ends. It's a continuous process. It seems like things change every year or even mid-year, but it's been an exciting path. And, I think we've had a good partnership also learning from each other.
Yeah, we got to thank the federal government for all that stuff, right? So every day something changes. Well, tell us a little bit about yourself. I know you had this kind of vast career, and it looks like you did some tech stuff while going to med school and then doing cardiology. So I'd love to kind of hear about where you've been, your whole experience, your whole kind of career path that led you where you're at today.
Yeah, I've jumped around a bit. I think it's helped me get to where I'm at. I did start my career in computer science. I got my bachelor's in computer science and did programming work. And I was in the programming space during Y2K and doing a lot of testing work. I think there's some parallels to some of the things and challenges we have with EMRs and just navigating, the appropriate architecture and security and some of the learnings we had from there. And then I switched gears and went into medicine. And I also, after my schooling, I did management consulting work for about 5 years and then went into practice. So during my consulting time, I was doing mainly pharma and life sciences consulting and a lot of work with the FDA and international FDA agencies, working with pharmaceutical companies and their processes in terms of how they report adverse events and issues with their clinical trials. In 2010, I started as a cardiologist in Richmond, formed James River Cardiology, and we grew that pretty well over the 12, 13-year time period before we partnered with RC Capital, a private equity group, and formed AlignedCardio.
It's amazing that you've been able to go from kind of a tech industry, which today, I'm sure that it's helping you today with AI and all the generative AI that comes out and everything that's happening. I'm sure that really kind of sparks an interest for you, I would assume, because that's where you came from. So spanning this whole thing between consulting and tech and now your clinical practice, how'd that kind of develop your thought process for leadership and being a CEO and really being able to be responsible for a whole clinical practice and a whole MSO?
Well, it's probably my thinking has definitely evolved. When I left consulting and went into practice, I did think for a while that maybe my experience was going to be wasted. And wasn't necessarily going to use that because in practice, you're a little bit more of a clinician or a scientist. You're just kind of treating patients based on the algorithms, but the science behind it. As the business side, and even recently with my new role at AlignedCardio, as that has come more into play, I've realized that I've used that experience significantly more, and it's become pretty invaluable. And I think it's really, understanding and knowing what you know well, and also understanding what you don't know well.
Mhm.
And just, I don't think my role or anyone's role in my seat or even among our leadership team, it's a reasonable expectation to be able to know everything. We're doing a lot of new things and things are constantly evolving, but knowing what you don't know and trying to figure out where to get answers from and lean on consultants and partners to really make sure you're doing things the right way is really the key for us.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing going from kind of founding a business and being a founder and doing everything yourself, right? Because I'm sure with James River, you were doing a lot of things yourself and taking on HR and hiring and firing and running the clinical practice. And there's all payroll and there's RCM and all the other things you have to deal with. To now you're having to really surround yourself with really good people, and that's a hard thing to do for leadership and delegation. And I'm sure you've kind of been through that ringer a little bit as well, especially with the new MSO.
There are some big advantages. When we're growing aggressively, we can bring in good
Yep.
talent. And there is good talent out there, is finding the right folks. Everyone has different experiences and backgrounds. So we're able to merge those together and really learn from each other and really solve problems and figure out ways to, expand in the right fashion. That being said, there is a difference in what you're alluding to. We do have to delegate and allow folks to take full ownership. And that has been something that's been new because I can't be everywhere. And I have been used to being a little bit more hands-on. And so something that, has been a little bit of a transition for me.
Yeah, I remember when we met, we talked a lot about compliance, and you were involved in a lot of the things before we even got there. And so you were responsible for a lot of that compliance work already, even maybe not
Sure.
as an official thing, but it all stopped with you, right? So
Yeah. And even then, I thought I understood a little bit about compliance, but I've learned a lot and realized we didn't understand a lot about compliance. And even now, 4 years into it, there's still a lot to learn. And it's probably, I think it's related to compliance. That is probably an area where it's hard for someone to say they know everything about compliance
right.
or be expert just because it's constantly evolving. It's really just knowing where to focus and really understanding where your blind spots are and navigating those correctly.
I love that because kind of where you were to where you are today, I'm sure you have healthcare CEO colleagues that you're dealing with quite a bit, and you probably talk on a daily basis too. What do you think, or what do you talk to them about? Maybe things that they're just getting wrong about compliance, whether it's a thought process, a culture. A lot of our listeners are CEOs and board members who kind of want to hear from people like you who've done it, who've lived it, who've been under the microscope for 3 or 4 years and trying to build it out. What are you seeing that they're maybe not perceiving as correct?
Well, I think it's probably similar to what I've experienced and learned. I do think for most people in the seat that I was in and CEOs, if you're a smaller group or smaller practice, I think the philosophy is similar to what our philosophy was, doing the right thing and making sure you're not doing the wrong thing. That's, I think, in general, the mindset for many of the practices. I do think that there are a lot of nuances now that go beyond that. There's things that may seem like you're doing the right thing, but you may be making some mistakes there. And really setting up a structure and process and a way to kind of refine the approach as you go through and making sure you have a lens of compliance on what you're doing. I think that's the key. And I'll just give you an example, something we might have talked about or I might have spoken with your team, every year or even quarterly, there's new guidance that comes out from Medicare and CMS. And if you're not looking at those and seeing how they apply to your practice, you may miss something. It's not that you're intentionally doing something wrong, but you just may miss something that applies to a certain CPT code that you're billing for. And we didn't realize that it changed as frequently as it did. Now we have the checks in place, so we can automatically check that and identify things that could be issues for us and take a proactive approach with it.
Yeah, it's a great point, because mistakes happen. They always do. If they didn't exist, we wouldn't need compliance. But compliance, as you have set up with your organization, and as we've often said, we're going to make mistakes. Let's just fix it and learn from it and prevent it from happening again. And if you're not paying attention to it, and if you're not dealing with it, you're just building and expanding your problem. And it's just compounding day after day after day, right? And so,
Sure.
like you said, putting all of those pieces in place and letting those CEOs know that, hey, it's okay to not know what you don't know, but you need to get in there and kind of do some digging and have those parameters in place. I think that's a great point. And when we talk about compliance as an advantage, which is, this podcast, and we really talk about how people, how leaders, how CEOs, board members, anybody, associate private equity firms, when they look at a business, right, and they say, did you look at compliance as an investment in your organization to protect your investment, whether it's a career investment, a money investment, a reputation investment, whatever you want to call it, and not thinking that it's essentially overhead or they just make me do this, right, because I have to do this. How do you make that business case to yourself, to the, AlignedCardio, to RC Capital, to any of your colleagues, that compliance is an advantage and an investment, not just an overhead?
Having a structured compliance program gives us a lot of optionality, and we are growing and scaling. And that was something that was apparent early on. Without having this program in place, there were going to be headaches and potential landmines with every new project until we had this structure foundation set up. That being said, now when we look at groups for acquisition, we closed on an acquisition earlier this week even. We have the framework set up. We do a compliance assessment similar to what you do for our practice. Some of it involves coding and RCM, but it also it involves governance and just training and other policies and procedures. And more often than not, there aren't major red flags, but it's very easy for us to just say, these are some of the areas that we identified. And once we close, we're gonna set up training or process changes and we'll get these addressed. And so we don't have to deal with these and we'll continue that refinement. And it's been very well received, similar to kind of the process we use. And I think that education and the back and forth has been really positive for us. And it really just makes it a stronger partnership where it doesn't seem like we're uncovering issues that, we're saying you're doing this wrong, but just here's ways for us to do this better and in a more compliant way.
This episode of the Compliance Advantage podcast is brought to you by Ronan Healthcare Compliance. At Ronan Healthcare Compliance, we believe in transforming healthcare compliance from a checkbox attitude to a strategic advantage. With decades of expertise, our team of consultants provides innovative solutions tailored to your organization's unique needs. We don't just help you meet your standards. We elevate your business, ensuring ethical practices are at the heart of what you do. Whether you're navigating complex regulations or seeking to enhance your compliance strategy, Ronan Healthcare Compliance is your partner in achieving excellence in healthcare compliance. Ronan Healthcare Compliance, redefining compliance, empowering leadership. Visit us at ronanhc.com to learn more. Now, back to the show.
We talked a little bit about kind of ROI, and we talk about this all the time. Like, it's really hard to prove an ROI in compliance, proving like something didn't happen, right? We prepared and we prevented all these things from happening. Well, you never know. You never know if you weren't picked. You never know if you didn't get an audit. You never know that something didn't happen. So many a times there is a real way to say, this is the business advantage. This is where we saw having a program in place allowed us to do X, Y, and Z. And you talked a little bit about, pulling in practices and making sure that they're not, risky for you. Is there any other kind of real returns that you've seen that compliance has created a business advantage? Either it's with, contracting partners, payers, Your private equity sponsored, hospitals, something of that nature.
Yeah, there have been other areas where we've seen some real benefit. It is hard to quantify ROI, as you mentioned, but as we are developing and expanding, time to market is a big advantage. And we've had to navigate compliance heavy initiatives, and that involves a certificate of public need with the state health agencies. And most recently, we navigated accreditation process for our ambulatory surgery center, which did require us to lean heavily on our compliance program and the processes that we had established. They had a pretty in-depth review of our program and the process and how it applied to the surgery center. And so we were fortunate to get that approved on our first pass, and excited that we can replicate this with our additional developments.
It's funny you say that, because a lot of people are like, I can grow and I can do all these things, and I might not need like a compliance program because that's over here. It's not really operations, doesn't really kind of affect my ASC, right? And at the end of the day, you're like, I have to show that I have this thing to be able to get the accreditation, or to show that I'm a good person or I'm a good business. And it's amazing how many times you sit there and think, oh, I'll do that later. I'll do that after I grow, as opposed to while you're growing.
I think it's probably a little bit of a misunderstanding, because if you were to come to me maybe 5 years ago or 10 years ago and talk to me about helping us with a compliance program, I'd probably say, this is going to be a heavy lift and you're going to be telling me a lot of things that maybe I shouldn't be doing. Now, knowing what I know, there is a lift. I don't want to minimize that, but it's usually a collaborative lift. And more often than not, it's not, a response of, no, you can't do this, but this is how we may be able to do this better. And we've been fortunate to be able to work together and really maximize that. It would be rare for me to go back to a provider and say, we can't do this. I think that this is a better approach for us to use.
Really good example of a real-time thing. When you went from, I'll do it later, this is a big lift, we need to do something else right now.
Sure.
We need to make money, we put operations in place, versus, hey, we need our protections in place. And it's such a great example of a business advantage from that standpoint. As you look at it, how do you balance your team and all the people, even your private equity sponsors? I think that's important to be able to relay to them that you have everything under control. You got a good compliance functionality for the portfolio company. But how do you balance like educating the team without trying to scare them, right? Because there's a lot of compliance out there that runs around and wants to be a hammer looking for a nail and wants to scare people and scare tactics, and you're going to go to jail and I don't look good in orange. So tired of kind of hearing all those things, right? It's true, but I'm tired of hearing about that. But like, how do you as a leader educate your team by saying there's risk out there, but you don't need to build fear or that kind of culture of being afraid?
Yeah, it's a top-down message. It starts with me and the leadership team. It's obviously heavy on in the clinical side. And you're absolutely right. We're not trying to scare folks, but we're just trying to inform them of why these different training programs are important for the team as a whole. We do use the technology to get messages across. We have a monthly update that goes out, a monthly newsletter, and there's always a compliance tidbit that's shared. And then, we have the quarterly training programs that are available, and there's some that are mandatory and some that are optional. And we've made it so that in the past, there were a lot of training programs that, you probably had to spend an hour for 10 minutes worth of time. Now, fortunately, the training programs are shorter with the high yield information, so they can benefit from it. And we're getting feedback from them also. So if they're telling us that the program is maybe not as good as it should be, or we didn't get to the point as quick as we needed to, then we can revamp that and build it into the next one.
I love this kind of thought process that as the leadership talks to their staff or the people that they surround them with, not going, oh, you know what, I'm a sick compliance after you, or it's an I got you moment, or we're going to call compliance because you're not doing something right, versus, hey, they're a strategic partner to us. We're going to grow. We want to do this ASC. We want to do this accreditation. Let's get compliance in the room so we can have a conversation with them. And I think, is that your style? Is that your style to say, hey, bring them in. Let's have a conversation with them in the room so that we can talk through this, versus, let's ask for forgiveness, then permission, right? All those kind of things.
On new initiatives, we definitely have the compliance team part of it to help guide, especially if we're developing new processes and procedures around something new. I think it's just been a value add, and Now that we have the structure set up, it's almost extension of our team. It's not like we're bringing someone else in from outside, but it's just a part of our day-to-day process. We also have the ongoing assessment process where we're just reviewing how we're doing things. And that'll also may uncover where we can do things better. And that's always a continuous loop fed back to our operations team or executive team.
Oh, that's amazing. I love the feedback pieces of it, because if you don't have good feedback about what works and what doesn't work, then it all falls apart, right? So that's amazing. I think you've had some really great insights as to what it takes to go from kind of here to here. And that's pretty amazing you've been able to have that journey of pre-compliance to kind of all in compliance program that becomes a strategic partner, which doesn't happen very often and really defines what that compliance advantage is. As we wrap up here, we always ask our guests the same question. Health is wealth, in my opinion. So what do you do to take care of yourself? I mean, you're a doctor. You got to live the dream, right? You got to be a healthy person to tell everybody else what to do. What do you do to take care of yourself just on the average?
I've partnered with my daughters. They're both in high school to do various sports activities. So I'm getting into squash with one of my daughters, and I go to one of these workout classes, a solid core class, which is not easy for me, but I go once a week to exercise with her. And then I'm a jogger, so I try to jog at least a couple times a week. I do think our team in general, we've been extremely busy and people working longer hours and sometimes on weekends. So we're trying to be mindful of that, take breaks and making sure that everyone's focused on their health. And we do a weekly recap also before we get into our leadership call, and just how is everyone doing outside of work, and making sure everyone's in a good spot. So that's been a good change we implemented roughly about a year back.
I feel the same way about that. You're in healthcare. You got to lead with it. You got to live it. You got to show it. And same thing with our team too. You wins, learning opportunities, and what are you doing to take care of yourself this weekend? And it's really kind of a, mental, spiritual, physical, whatever it may be. Like, what does it take to recharge? Right.
Sure.
Well, Mitesh, thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate your insights. We're on point, and we'll have you on again when we're talking about some more compliance advantage. So thanks for joining us today. Thank you for listening to today's episode of the Compliance Advantage podcast. If you enjoyed it, please rate, review, and share this episode with someone who might benefit from it. Don't forget to visit us at ronanhc.com for more resources and connect with us on social media for the latest updates. And remember, compliance pays dividends. Invest today.